first time that I ever visited MCC Toronto, people probably thought I was a guy because that's how I was dressed at the time anyway. That's how I was presenting. A few months before that, 3 years ago this coming Tuesday, in fact, I had driven from my office out in the suburbs and parked my car at Church Street in Wellesley in the village and walked into the Glad Day bookshop and said to the person behind the counter through my tears that I had questions about my gender identity. I had never spoken those words to anyone before. I had never been able to do that before. I had never believed those things about myself. But after a couple of decades of insisting that it was fine, that I was totally fine, I couldn't do it anymore. I'd found Glad Day in an internet search. It's the world's oldest queer bookstore. And I didn't really know where to start, but I figured maybe reading something would be a good first step. And so I asked the person behind the counter what I should be reading. And they pointed me to a couple of books written by trans women. And then they said to me, you know, if you need to talk to somebody, the 519 is just up the block. I must have looked like I needed to talk to somebody. And so that's where I went, because I did need to talk to somebody. I went up the block to the LGBTQ plus community center, and not too long after that, I went for an appointment with a therapist that I'd found through the 519, and not long after that, I went out in person for the first time with other trans women. And not long after that, hoping to find a place where I could experience welcome in a faith community where it would be okay for me to show up with all my questions, I decided to visit MCC. I found you all online too, and I was grateful to discover a 7 p.m. service on Sunday because as a senior pastor working at another church in another denomination, I had this standing gig on Sunday mornings. Reverend Jeff can tell you how that works. And so I showed up one evening. And on that evening, I saw pride flags hanging in the sanctuary. I saw a trans flag in the sanctuary. I saw people in the pews around me, and I thought, you know, I could probably be myself, my full self, around these folks. And on that night, I heard Reverend Dina Dudley share a message about courage, and one of the things she said was how inspired she was by the courage of trans people. And so after the service, when Reverend Dina introduced herself to me, I gave her the name that I was trying out back then. It was not June in those days. And I said, I think I might be trans. That happened right there, right there. It says right there, in front of our big sanctuary in beautiful gold letters, welcome home. But the reality is even deeper and even more beautiful than those words printed at the front of the sanctuary, because the things that I saw and the things that I heard and the things I experienced in that first visit to MCC Toronto said to me, you are safe here, June. Welcome home. And that was my first visit. And now I want to tell you about my next visit and the couple of visits that happened after that. It might have been a week later. It might have been a couple of weeks later. I don't quite remember, but the next time that I showed up, I wasn't dressed like a guy anymore. The next time I showed up as me, as myself, as the woman that I am, out of costume, presenting as myself. And at the time, I really hadn't done very much of that. It was so new to me. I hadn't been out very much in public. I was still almost entirely in the closet. I was only out to a few special people in my life. I did not have any confidence. I was terrified, in fact, but I was also determined to keep putting one foot in front of the other, even if I wasn't sure where I was headed. I can remember so vividly finding a parking spot up the block from the church, like, way up Simpson Avenue or maybe down in one of the metered spots on Girard Street. And I can remember feeling a kind of vulnerability that I had never felt before as I walked along the street. It just felt like everybody was looking at me and judging me and potentially labeling me. And I thought, like, what if somebody sees me and says something? But I would slip into the back of the sanctuary and I would take a deep breath to calm my nerves and center myself. And I would come and sit right about here. Not in the very back, but pretty close. In a place where I hoped nobody would notice me. In a place where I could slip out without having to talk to anybody. I sat right here. And I stood up when it was time to stand up. I sang when it was time to sing. I prayed when it was time to pray. I heard a message when it came time to hear a message. I gave when the plate was passed and it was time to give. If I was feeling especially confident, when the time came, I would make my way to the front of the sanctuary to receive communion and a blessing. I always loved that so much. It meant so much to me. But mostly I just sat here and tried to take it all in. And I cried a lot. And I sighed like I do a lot. And I sat here and I wondered what was going to happen? What was going to come next? Where was I headed? What kind of future could I possibly have? I wondered, who am I, and am I ever going to be able to come out? And if I did, what would happen to my career? What would happen to my family? What would happen to me? Even if I found a safe space here in this sanctuary, I still felt lost a lot of the time in those days, stuck between one place and another, between one reality, one way of being and another. I felt uprooted. I felt homesick. Do you know that feeling? Do you? I felt like a wanderer, you know. The children of God have often been wanderers, you know. We have been nomads, living in tents. We have been exiles, longing for home. We have been refugees with no home to go back to. We've been itinerants. We have been part of the entourage of a teacher who said, you know, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but me, I don't have a place to lay my head. We have been pilgrims, beloved. We haven't had places to gather, and so we gathered in garages. We gathered in living rooms. We gathered in kitchens. We gathered upstairs from a gay bar. We have been tenants, borrowers, not owners. Do you know that in the earliest days of our history, here at MCC Toronto, in the days of Bob Wolfe, who wore this stole, people used to say about us, you have to show up this Sunday to find out where they're going to be next Sunday. That is our story, beloved. And it's true in more ways than one. Hear that word today. Let it find you wherever you are, like an exile all over again, tuning in from who knows where, on your computer, on your TV, on your phone, on your tablet. Where will we be next? Who knows? Who knows? The children of God have so often been wanderers. We have wandered before and we will wander again. We have walked in trepidation into brand new spaces, trying on what feel like brand new identities, full of anxiety and full of wonder. And we will do that again, I'm sure. And we're in good company, you know, when we do that. When I think about stories of wanderers, one of the first people I envision is Moses. Moses spent so much of his life wandering, pretty much his entire life, between one place and the next, between one identity and another, from Egypt to the wilderness, to Egypt again, to the wilderness again, as an Egyptian prince, as a Hebrew slave, as a fugitive, as a liberator, as a leader. But when we meet Moses in the 3rd chapter of Exodus, the chapter from which we have heard today, he's just a shepherd working for his father-in-law in and around a place called Midian. And out there in that wilderness, near that place called Midian, Moses saw a bush that was on fire. But the story goes, that bush wasn't being consumed by the fire. Now, many of us know this story, and it's a story about how Moses heard the divine voice, how he learned that he was being called to help liberate his enslaved people. It's a story that reveals how God is on the side of the exploited and the marginalized. It's a story about how God's identity, God's name, is beyond our ability to define. I am that I am, God says. That comes a little bit later in the story. God also says to Moses, I will be with you. You may be a wanderer, my beloved child, but you are not alone. Wherever you wander, wherever you wind up, I am with you. When you don't know how you're going to get from one place to another, when you don't know how long it's going to take or how hard it's going to be, I am with you. In the times when you're anxious and afraid, the times when you say to yourself, I can't do this, I am with you. It's okay that you are a wanderer. It is okay, because wherever you wander, God says, I am with you. And then God said to Moses, after you bring the people out of Egypt, you will come back here and you'll worship me right here on this mountain. God said, listen, you've got an arduous journey ahead of you. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take a while. You might despair now and then. You might struggle to keep faith. You might encounter people who want to stop you or cut you down. You might find yourself stuck with an army behind you and the sea in front of you. But when you've been through all that, you're going to come back here, back to this space, to this place where today you are feeling doubt and anxiety and confusion. You are going to come back here, and when you do, God says, I will be here. You're going to meet me back here. We're going to meet in lots of places along the way too, but we're going to meet here. You will come back here. God's people have often been wanderers. We have wandered before. God knows that. Even in the midst of a stay-at-home order, we are wandering now, and we will wander again. From one place to another, from one orientation or identity or way of being to another, from one theological perspective to another, from one calling to another, from one trial to another, or one wilderness to another, from one season to another, from one pilgrimage to another, or one home to another. Along the way, there are these sanctuaries, these holy places, these places that we can call home. I think we found one right here, friends. And God takes delight in gathering us back to those places and bringing us full circle somehow. God takes delight in reminding us how far we've come. We've been here before, beloved. And we'll be here again together. Thanks to the gatherer of pilgrims, the one who loves us on every step of the way, the one who is with us always. Amen.